The hidden daughter, I'm the affair baby, a living reminder of scandals, secrets, and family betrayal. I'm what people like to call the affair kid. Yep, that's me, a walking, talking reminder of every tabloid-worthy scandal and all the whispered judgments. My mom? She's the classic villain in everyone's story, the homewrecker folks love to point fingers at. Because of how I came into this world, my life's always been tangled up with the messy stories of my parents. My mom grew up tough. Her dad walked out on her and my grandmother, leaving them for another woman, which left nothing but bitterness behind. My grandma didn't handle it well. She drowned her sorrows in booze and took her frustrations out on my mom, verbally, physically, the whole deal. That's when my mom crossed paths with my dad, the big-shot CEO of some high-profile company. Now, as the story goes, my dad was on the hunt for excitement outside his marriage, maybe even a little emotional escape. My mom? She was young, gorgeous, and way too captivating for him to resist. What started as a fling quickly turned into something more, at least for her. My dad probably thought he was clever, throwing some money her way to keep things simple. But let's be real, you can't cover a flame with paper and not expect it to burn through. When my mom found out she was pregnant, she discovered my dad's happily married status. He assumed she'd just roll with it, and in a way, she did, just not how he hoped. Going back to her abusive mom wasn't an option, and neither was giving up the only spark of light she had left. What she didn't realize was that the road ahead wasn't a way up, it was a free fall. My dad? He thought he could keep everything under control. But my mom had bigger dreams. She'd grown up idealizing the kind of love that ends in forever, with marriage as the ultimate goal. When she couldn't secure that, she went all in on the drama, crying fits, threats to end it all, and in the middle of all that chaos, I was born. I arrived a month early, thanks to my mom's theatrics. The day my dad's wife gave birth to their child, my mom rushed to the hospital for an emergency C-section, determined to make her presence known. As soon as she woke up from the anesthesia, she called my dad, demanding he show up and acknowledge his newborn daughter. He turned off his phone. And honestly? I don't even blame him. Who wouldn't want to undo the mess they'd gotten themselves into? If I were him, I'd wish I could go back and never take things that far, too. But thanks to me, my dad was stuck. My mom made sure of that. She threatened to jump off his office building with me in her arms if he ever abandoned us. And when my mom made a threat, she didn't just talk, she acted. Her theatrics worked, at least enough to get us a tiny apartment and a monthly check to cover the basics. My mom's relentless determination made sure we always had somewhere to sleep. My earliest memory of my dad? My mom spent weeks calling him nonstop, threatening to end it all if he didn't show up. She overdosed on sleeping pills, cut her wrists, anything to force his hand. Eventually, he came to our dingy apartment. He threw a wad of cash on the table, his face twisted with irritation. Isn't this what you wanted? Next time, talk to my secretary. Stop calling me. My mom didn't miss a beat. Her voice was sharp enough to pierce steel. Elliot, where's your conscience? Do you remember when we? He pinched the bridge of his nose, cutting her off with a sigh. It's Madison's birthday today. I don't have time for this. Madison Carter, his real daughter, the one he had with his wife. She and I were born on the same day, same year. She was the golden child in his picture-perfect family, while I was the mistake he couldn't erase. My mom wasn't about to let him leave without a fight. She grabbed me and shoved me forward like a trophy. What about her? She's your daughter too. Or are you pretending she doesn't exist? He didn't even look at me. His jaw tightened as he headed for the door. But my mom clung to his leg, wailing and sobbing, her tears soaking into his tailored pants. It was just another scene in their endless drama. And me? I was just the kid in the background, ignored by both of them. I wandered over to the coffee table and stared at the pile of cash. Looking up at my dad, I asked, "Are you really rich?" He hesitated, then nodded awkwardly. I picked up the money, struggling under its weight, and held it out to him. I don't need this much. I don't eat a lot. Can you stay with me for a little while instead? His expression shifted: shock, maybe even guilt. After a moment, he sat down stiffly on the worn-out sofa. I climbed up next to him with a battered booklet I'd found at the supermarket, full of silly little cartoons and stories. Handing it to him, I asked, as naturally as any kid wanting attention, "Can you read this to me?" He did. His voice was stiff and mechanical, but I didn't care. I listened intently, leaning against his arm without thinking. When he got up to leave, I stopped him. I grabbed a tiny, smudged birthday cake from the table and held it out. "Today's your birthday too?" he asked after a long pause. I nodded. He looked uncomfortable, rubbing his hands together. "I didn't bring you anything." But I just smiled, holding up the booklet. "You already gave me the best birthday present." The next day, a giant doll, taller than me, showed up at our door. I was 5 years old. Most kids learn to walk or talk early. Me? I picked up something different. By that age, I already knew how to read the room, how to watch people's faces, and how to plan my next move. It was a skill I'd need for the rest of my life. After that, my dad started dropping by to visit us once or twice a month. When he came over, he'd sit with me for a bit, tell me a story, or just chat. Sometimes, he even took me out to grab a meal. He knew how to sweet-talk my mom when it suited him, especially when he needed something from her. One evening, he showed up while my mom was sitting alone with a drink. She didn't notice how much she was starting to resemble my grandma, angry, bitter, and quick to explode. She let all her rage out on him, yelling and throwing accusations like knives. At first, he stayed quiet, but eventually, he sat down and poured himself a drink too. He started venting about his problems, complaints about his marriage, his life, everything weighing him down. The two of them drank together, trading sob stories until the night blurred away. By morning, they woke up in my mom's bed. The look on my dad's face said it all. He was utterly crushed, like he couldn't believe he'd let himself make the same mistake again. 9 months later, my little brother was born. The first time I saw him, wrinkly and red-faced, I thought he was the weirdest, ugliest little thing I'd ever laid eyes on. He wailed at the top of his lungs, his toothless mouth stretched open wide. Curious, I reached out and gently touched his cheek. The second my finger brushed his skin, he stopped crying, turned his tiny head, and latched onto my finger like it was the most important thing in the world. With Jamie's arrival, things started to change. My dad moved us into a bigger apartment and doubled the monthly checks. Life got a bit easier. My mom's old ambitions flared back to life. Holding Jamie in her arms, she kissed his tiny face and looked at me with pride. "See this," she said, beaming. "That woman your dad married only gave him a daughter. But me? I gave him a son. Because of your brother, he'll have to treat us differently now." She was holding onto a dream built on a throwaway comment my dad made years ago, back when things between them were still new. He'd said he always wanted a son. But it was just wishful thinking on her part. My dad had no plans to leave his wife, let alone marry my mom. One day, he made that perfectly clear. "Eileen Harper," he said coldly, "don't you dare get any ideas. If you try to bring this up to Delilah, I swear I'll make your life miserable. You're always talking about wanting to die, why don't you just do it already?" Later, I learned the truth about Delilah, my dad's wife. Her family was the reason my dad was so successful. Divorce was never on the table. That day, my mom snapped. She shoved Jamie into my arms, screamed like a wild animal, and headbutted my dad right in the stomach. "Why don't you just kill us all, then?" Jamie started wailing, his tiny fists flailing, and I held him close, silently watching the chaos unfold. If I'd had the choice, I wouldn't have picked either of them as my parents. The fight ended with my mom bruised and battered, and my dad leaving with a bloody scratch across his face. It wasn't long after that my mom gave up on the dream of being with my dad. She finally accepted that nothing she did would change anything. Her focus shifted. "Who cares about being his wife?" she said with a bitter laugh. "You two are his kids. He can't deny that. From now on, I'll spend his money however I want." "Why not? It'd be a waste not to." She threw herself into gambling. Nights turned into all-nighters at the card tables, and she stopped caring about her looks or her health. When I went to drag her home, I'd find her stuffing greasy pizza into her mouth while yelling at the dealer, "Hit me. Come on, or I'm all in." Cards, dice, and booze became her entire world. From a young age, I had to step up and take care of Jamie. While other kids' first words were mom or dad, his were sissy. When other kids ran to their parents for comfort, he came to me. At first, I resented him for it. His constant needs stole my childhood. I couldn't play with friends or hang out after school like other kids. As soon as the bell rang, I had to rush home. Mom was either out drinking or gambling, and Jamie, still a toddler, would be left alone, crying himself hoarse in a filthy diaper. One stormy night, Mom didn't come home. Thunder crashed outside, and I hid under my blanket, trembling. I've always been terrified of thunderstorms. To me, they're like wild, roaring beasts ready to tear me apart. Then I felt Jamie climb into my bed. His tiny body pressed against mine, and he wrapped his arms around me. Just as I was about to tell him it would be okay, he gently patted my back. "Don't be scared, sissy," he whispered. "Don't worry. I'm here. I'll protect you." Tears filled my eyes as I held him close. He was only 5 years old, but that moment changed everything. It was the first time I truly understood what it meant to love someone with your whole heart. When Jamie was 12, I got accepted into the finance program at Harvard University on a full scholarship. For the first time, a future filled with hope and possibility stretched out before me. But even as I prepared for this new chapter, I couldn't stop worrying about Jamie. Living with our mom, a woman as unreliable as the wind, meant he couldn't even count on regular meals, let alone a stable life. He had just started middle school, still a chubby, cheerful kid who hadn't hit puberty yet, but he spoke with a maturity far beyond his years. "Sis, don't worry about me," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "Go to Massachusetts. I'll take care of myself and Mom, too." That summer, I used the money I'd saved from part-time jobs to hire a nanny to look after the house. Still, my heart felt heavy as I boarded the plane for Boston. College was a revelation. For the first time in my 18 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. Nobody here knew I was the child of an affair. There were no cruel whispers, no judgmental stares. No one treated me like I was less than anyone else. For once, I didn't have to deal with Mom's gambling and drinking or a paternal family that pretended I didn't exist. But my fragile peace shattered less than a month into my freshman year. Delilah, my father's wife, discovered Jamie and me. She had never known we existed. Not because my father had been particularly good at hiding us, but because we were insignificant weeds in her eyes, growing unnoticed in the shadows. It was my mother who exposed us. Drowning in gambling debt, she went to my father for money. When he refused, she went straight to Delilah. Delilah showed up at our rundown apartment, her lips curled into a sneer. She offered my mom $50,000 to take Jamie and disappear. Mom laughed in her face. "50,000? What do you take me for, a beggar? I gave birth to 2 of Christian's kids, and one's a boy. So what if they're bastards? Don't think I don't know the law. Even illegitimate children have inheritance rights. My kids will get their share of the family fortune one day." Delilah's smirk only deepened. She left without a word, but the next time she returned, her offer had risen to $500,000 on the condition that Jamie would live with her and my father, and my mom would relinquish all parental rights. Cornered by her creditors, my mom saw the money and her eyes lit up. By the time I found out, it was too late. Jamie was already gone, taken to live with Delilah and my father. Furious, I called my mom. "Jamie is only 12. How could you send him to live in a house where he'll always be an outsider? Don't you understand how Delilah might treat him?" Mom, now debt-free and detached, replied with maddening indifference. "Why wouldn't she treat him well? Jamie is your father's son, which means they come in a package together. If she had a problem with being a stepmother or with his infidelity, she'd have divorced him. Your brother is living the high life now, big house, servants. Don't be jealous just because your father wanted a boy. Once your brother settles in, we'll all benefit. He'll take care of his sister once he's rich, won't he? I snapped, bring Jamie back. Even if we have to scrape by, at least he'll be safe. She sighed, exasperated. Bring him back? And who's going to take care of him? You? Don't ruin his future. He's with his father now, that's where he belongs. I raised you two for over a decade. It's Christian's turn to step up. Besides, the money's gone. What if they ask for it back? Do you have $500,000 lying around? Seething, I hung up and called my father next. What's going on? What does Delilah plan to do with Jamie? He sounded irritated. Your mother caused this by begging Delilah for money. That's how she found out. But honestly, it's generous of Delilah to take Jamie in after everything. He's my son, this is his chance to reconnect with his roots. To him, it was a blessing. He even thanked Delilah for her kindness. Swallowing my anger, I pleaded, Dad, since Jamie is staying with you, please look after him. He's only 12 and needs his father's guidance. With your success, I'm sure he'll grow up to be just as accomplished as you. The words burned as I said them, but I knew his ego would respond to flattery. From Massachusetts, there was little I could do but hope. I called Jamie every day. At first, he talked about the new house and his adjustment. He said Delilah always looked stern and Bella, her daughter, didn't like him. He spent most of his time alone in his room. As the days passed, his updates grew shorter. I'm fine, he'd say. The food's good. Then, one day, he whispered, Sis, I want to come home. I don't want to live here anymore. I can cook for myself, I can make sandwiches and even pasta. His words broke me. Fighting back tears, I promised, Jamie, give me 4 years. Once I graduate, I'll bring you to live with me. After a long pause, he whispered back, Okay, sis. I'll wait for you. But just a few days later, while I was working a shift at McDonald's, my mom called, sobbing. Alice, something's happened to your brother. A deafening buzz filled my head as she wailed, Why? Her words came in broken fragments, choked by tears. He's gone. Jamie's gone. I thought he'd be okay. I thought this would give him a better life. My son didn't even get to enjoy his life or his fortune, and now he's gone. It took me minutes to process what she was saying. Jamie had eaten a macaron at my father's house. He'd had a severe allergic reaction and died. I stood frozen, the phone slipping from my hand as the weight of her words crushed me. At 2 years old, Jamie had a reaction to peanut butter so severe I dragged Mom away from her card game to rush him to the hospital. The doctor had warned us, his nut allergy was life-threatening. Both my parents knew this. Jamie himself had been careful ever since. I couldn't fathom how much he'd eaten for it to be fatal. The little brother who had comforted me during thunderstorms, who promised to wait for me, was gone before I could bring him home. 6 years later, I returned to this city, having completed both my undergraduate and graduate studies at Harvard. During those 6 years, I lived entirely on my own, working extra jobs to make ends meet. I never came back, nor did I contact anyone here. I couldn't. Jamie was like a scar etched into my heart. Until my wings were strong enough to carry the weight, I didn't dare reopen that wound. I was afraid of what it would do to me. My mother still lived in the same apartment. She was only in her 40s, but years of late nights playing cards and indulging in her vices had left her bloated and prematurely aged. Her once beautiful face was now weary and hardened. When she opened the door and saw me, she froze, her face a mix of shock and something unreadable. For a long minute, she just stared at me. Finally, wiping her tears with a rough hand, she said bitterly, So, you're finally back. I was starting to think you'd forgotten you had a mother. Jamie would have never abandoned me like this. He cared. If only he were still here. He's been gone for 6 years, I interrupted coldly, my voice sharp enough to cut through her self-pity. Stepping into the apartment, I felt the suffocating weight of everything that had changed and everything that hadn't. Mom's tears dried as quickly as they had fallen, replaced by a sudden, almost eager brightness. You're back, and that's what matters. After all these years in school, you've finally made something of yourself. Now I can count on you. I glanced at the couch, piled high with dirty laundry, then chose to sit at the dining table instead. The air was stale, heavy with years of neglect. As she started bustling around, talking about making me tea, I stopped her mid-sentence. There's no need. I'm only here to ask one thing. She turned toward me, her face guarded. When you sent Jamie to live with Delilah, I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me, did you tell her about his nut allergy? Of course, I did. Her voice flared with indignation. I told her over and over, no nuts. Peanuts, almonds, cashews, anything like that. Delilah said she understood. And Jamie was 12. He knew better, too, he was always careful. I didn't respond, my gaze lingering on a photo of Jamie stuck to the fridge with a faded magnet. Ignoring her pleas for me to stay, I left the apartment with one thing, a photograph of Jamie on his 12th birthday. I had taken it myself. In it, he was beaming, his crescent-shaped eyes full of joy, showing off his small, perfect teeth. I had a copy, but I couldn't leave the original behind in that place. Later, I arranged to meet my father at a cafe. He looked much the same, time seemed to have treated him more kindly than it had my mother. It was an accident, he said hastily, before I even sat down, his voice strained with defensiveness. I told the housekeeper, Amanda, about Jamie's allergy. She knew. But that day, she made macarons, left them on the table, and forgot to tell Jamie. He ate one without realizing. The next morning. He paused, his hands gripping his coffee cup. The next morning, Amanda found him in his room. And you? My voice was low but unrelenting. You didn't notice anything unusual the night before? He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. I wasn't home. I had a dinner meeting. Your stepmother said Jamie seemed fine after dinner, just a little rash on his face. He didn't say he felt sick, so she thought nothing of it. He went to bed like usual. I stirred my coffee, the clinking of the spoon against the cup the only sound between us. But inside, I felt like my heart was being crushed in a vice. How terrible must it have been to suffocate to death alone? Did Jamie struggle through the night, gasping for air? Did he cry out for help? Did he try to call me? The questions I had buried for 6 long years now surged to the surface, a tidal wave threatening to pull me under. After it happened, my father continued, his voice tinged with desperation, Delilah immediately let Amanda go. It was an accident. Truly. Your stepmother and Bella adored Jamie. When he passed, Bella cried the hardest. His words rang hollow, like an echo in an empty room. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter, but nowhere near as bitter as the memories clawing at my chest. Swallowing down the storm of emotions, I forced a calm smile. Dad, let's not dwell on the past. It's painful for both of us. He relaxed visibly, his shoulders sagging with relief. You're right. No point in dwelling on it. So, what are your plans now that you're back? I returned his smile, small but deliberate. I majored in finance management, I said softly. I'd like to work at your company. My dad hesitated, his discomfort written all over his face. I sighed softly, my tone shifting to something gentler. Jamie used to tell me how much he admired you. He said he didn't get to spend enough time with you, but he was so proud of everything you'd accomplished. Now that he's gone, I thought, maybe I could spend that time with you instead, in his honor. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. You're a legend in this city, Dad. I'd love to learn from you, start at the bottom, just like any regular employee. I won't embarrass you or throw your name around. I'll even go by Jenny Bennett, so no one will know I'm your daughter. Seeing his expression soften, I pressed on. I promise I won't cause any trouble. Just give me the chance to prove myself. He couldn't outright refuse, but he didn't give me what I wanted either. Instead of placing me in the headquarters of Nova Group, he quietly arranged for me to work at a subsidiary of venture capital firm called LB Investment. I started as a business associate in the development department. The HR manager, an old confidant of my father's, helped keep my identity a secret. At LB Investment, no one knew I was Christian Baldwin's daughter. I even kept my education credentials under wraps, knowing I needed to earn respect on my own terms. My first assignment? Conducting street surveys for feasibility analysis. It was simple, repetitive work. Most of my colleagues outsourced the task to students who badgered random pedestrians to fill out forms. Unsurprisingly, the results were messy and unhelpful. Instead of following suit, I studied the surveys carefully, targeting specific audiences for each project. E-commerce surveys went to young adults, early education ones to new moms, and shared e-scooter surveys to office workers. By tailoring my approach, I produced reports that were useful and actionable for clients. It wasn't long before Henry Smith, the company's manager, noticed my work. During a team meeting, I casually mentioned that I'd graduated from Harvard. His reaction was immediate and incredulous. A Harvard graduate doing surveys? That's such a waste of talent. A week later, I was promoted to team leader. In just 2 months, my team secured 2 significant projects, earning recognition across the company. Once the contracts were finalized, I quietly let HR inform Henry about my master's degree. "Why didn't you mention your education when you started here?" Henry asked, visibly puzzled. "You could have been placed in a much higher position right away." I kept my tone steady. A degree doesn't prove anything. What matters are skills and results. Too often, new hires come in with high expectations but fail to deliver. I wanted to show what I'm capable of through hard work, not credentials. Impressed by my performance, Henry promoted me to his assistant within 6 months. As Henry's assistant, my responsibilities expanded dramatically. I transitioned from small-scale projects worth tens of thousands to working with publicly traded companies on deals worth millions. One day, during a meeting with a client, I overheard a conversation about Crest Group's upcoming billion-dollar investment project. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I knew I had to get involved. That evening, Crest was hosting a corporate cocktail party at the Evergreen Hotel. The event was invitation only, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. I slipped into a season's latest burgundy Gucci wrap dress, styled my hair into loose, voluminous curls, and opted for a bold, vintage-inspired makeup look. I looked every inch the part, confident that I'd blend in with the city's elite. But when I arrived at the venue, security guards at the entrance were checking for invitations. "Excuse me, ma'am. May I see your invite?" one of them asked politely. Feigning composure, I smiled and pretended to search my purse. "Just a moment," I said, my mind racing for a solution. As I scanned the area, a tall, sharply dressed man strode past me toward the entrance. He moved with an air of authority, and the guards didn't even stop him. Seizing the moment, I hurried to catch up, hooking my arm through his without hesitation. "You're walking so fast. Couldn't you wait for me?" I said, flashing him a warm, conspiratorial smile. He stopped abruptly, his expression startled. Up close, I saw that he was about 30, with sharp, chiseled features and captivating eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. The guards glanced at us but said nothing, letting us pass. Once we were out of their sight, I released his arm and stepped back. "I'm so sorry, I thought you were someone else," I said, offering an apologetic smile. The corners of his lips curved into a smirk, his dark eyes alight with amusement. "Did you, now?" he said, his voice low and smooth, as though he could see straight through my excuse. Before I could respond, he gave a slight bow. "It's an honor." "Enjoy your evening," he said, disappearing into the crowd with effortless grace. For a moment, I stood frozen, shaken by the encounter but determined not to lose focus. This was my chance to make an impression on Crest Group, and nothing, not even a stranger who looked like he walked out of a GQ magazine, was going to distract me. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my dress, and stepped into the glittering world of opportunity.